let me ask you this. Do you think gender and sex are complicated?
I think it's obvious that it is complicated. And for these young people
so why
and for
make
adults,
a black and white decision?
And for those that are faced with this confusion, I think that we need to give them the help that they need.
Who do you want to give the mental health care? Because you've already said that the guidelines from the American Psychiatric Association are not correct. To them, a successful conclusion of this is a child who determines with their family and their caregivers and their mental health experts and their physician what the best course of treatment is. It may be that they get into it and decide, this is not for me. I'm not actually transgendered. But you're stepping in and saying, that's not the help they need.
Well, I think it is important for them to speak to and have that mental health treatment. Just because, again, that we disagree with whether or not they can have gender transitioning medications or surgeries does not mean that they can't have the opportunity to speak to licensed therapists and psychiatrists.
But you understand that when you go to speak to a psychiatrist, they have guidelines that they follow. And the guidelines are developed through peer-reviewed studies.
What I'm saying is that our reasoning behind passing this law in Arkansas is not to discriminate, but it's simply to protect and allow those children to continue to develop. We're not going to allow young people, a 16-year-old, to vote. We're not going to let them buy cigarettes. We're not going to let them do all of these things.
You're suggesting that buying cigarettes is equivalent to gender dysphoria?
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying that we have laws that are recognized, that we say that the age of majority is the point in which someone can make a decision for...
If a child comes and says, I'm depressed...
You can't even rent a car until you're 25.
Okay, so why allow children to get access to ADHD medication or depression medication or bipolar medication?
Well, it's because it's changing permanently.
It's not. It's just not.
It's not changing.
Puberty blockers aren't changing people permanently. They're just not. And the bar to get things that have maybe slightly more permanence to it is higher. And it takes longer. That's how the guidelines have been developed.
Arkansas has simply said, we're going to allow these children to be children. And as they are, we want to, again, encourage them to have the access to the mental health care, because none of us can imagine, whether it's my daughter, your daughter, your son, any of us can imagine having those conversations.
If my daughter or my son came to me in agony and I knew there was a program that I could get them into that had positive effects on their mental health, I would swim across rivers and climb mountains and tunnel through whatever I needed to get to save that child's life. And my guess is you'd do the same. And I truly hope you're never faced with that decision, because I imagine it's agonizing for the parent.
Yes.
And it's agonizing for the child. But the fact that you've removed that option for people seems antithetical to the values you profess to espouse.
Well, again, nothing is going to stop that child when he or she turns 18 from being able to make this decision.
Well, something will stop them if they don't turn 18.
I mean, I don't think it's fair to put and to say to a child, you're going to kill yourself if you don't take this medicine. That's essentially what you and this minority, that's all you talk about, is that the suicide rate is through the roof for these young people.
The suicide rate isn't through the roof because doctors want them to take the medicine. It's because they live in a state where who they are is actually something that is viewed as something that needs to be legislated. That a lot of the pressure that they feel isn't from who they are, but from society's reaction to who they are. And from people like the state of Arkansas outlawing the treatment that can help their mental health and their physical health.
All I've heard from you and from this very vocal minority.
What vocal minority are you talking about?
The opponents of our law in Arkansas, and those who are challenging it, not just the plaintiffs, but
vocal minority meaning the AMA, the AAP, the Endocrine Society. You're saying that vocal minority.
But it's a vocal minority of Americans, and I think that's what's important, and of Arkansans.
Why don't you consider allowing children who are experiencing gender dysphoria? Isn't it experimentation to not put them through treatment? Isn't that also experimentation? Why are you willing to experiment on them by doing nothing?
I'm not saying let's do nothing.
Well, you're not saying to follow the guidelines, so what should
Well,
you
they're
do?
guidelines. I'm saying get a second opinion. Talk to other doctors. Talk to family. Let this child.
But isn't that experimentation? How is that not experimentation? Because this other stuff has been determined through data and peer review.
But we haven't had enough data and peer review.
So it's all an experiment, isn't it? I have to be honest with you. The care and guidelines for transgender children seem a lot more considered and thought out than the law preventing them from getting it, where you can't even cite the medical organization that agrees with you. So if we're talking about one decision that seems rash and one decision that seems conservative, it's the guidelines for transition. Seems conservative. And the law seems rash.
Well, I believe that the outcry, and by those who are wanting to use these young people as political pawns and to attack those of us who put these sort of laws in place, are the ones who are in fact putting these children at risk and making them and putting them on public display and making it part of the mainstream media conversation. This was not part of the mainstream media conversation 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but now these children are being put on display by those who are claiming to protect them, when instead we need to ensure, again, that they are working through this with their own families, their own doctors, the communities, the children
You're
that
making
live
that illegal. All right. We do appreciate you sitting down and talking to us about it. And I hope that the law is shot down, because I do think that these children are in a very vulnerable situation. And I disagree with you that this protects them. I actually think the opposite.